The topic of our discussion is ecosystem. Ecosystem is defined as the functional unit of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. So accordingly, ecosystem have uh, two basic factors. One is abiotic factors, which deals with all environmental factors, physical and chemical. And biotic factors include the living organisms, which are classified further as producers, consumers, decomposers, and they form a food chain. Now, based on two habitats, ecosystem can be divided into broadly into terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem. Among them, again, in the terrestrial ecosystem, there is forest, grassland, desert, etc. An aquatic ecosystem contains pond, land, river, estuary, etc. The biotic and abiotic factors of ecosystem work in integrated manner so that the energy which is trapped by the producers, they flow through the subsequent levels of the consumers which form the trophic level. So the interaction of biotic and abiotic components results in a physical structure which is very specific for a particular type of ecosystem, and the distribution of different species occupying different level is called stratification. Normally the trees, which are the autotrophs, they occupy the vertical strata or layer of a forest, shrubs the second, and herbs and grasses occupy the bottom layers in the producer level. So the components of the ecosystem which are seen as functional unit, that is the producers, consumers, decomposers, their functions are productivity, which are performed by the producers, which are the autotrophic organisms. Then decomposers are those organisms which simplify the complex organic matter, dead decomposed plant and animal matter, and form simpler substances which recycle through the soil again. Another main function is energy flow. The energy which is trapped by the autotrophs in the form of sunlight, then converted into a chemical form, that is ATP, then which is passed from one level to other in the form of food. So it is the energy flow, and at the same time the nutrients are recycled, and that forms the biogeochemical cycle. Now, what is productivity? Productivity is defined as the primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or organic matter produced per unit area over a time period by plants, green plants during photosynthesis. It is expressed in terms of weight, either, or in terms of energy. Now, the rate of biomass production is actually called productivity. It is expressed in terms of either same gram or in terms of energy. This productivity is again subdivided into a gross primary productivity, which is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis, and the net primary productivity, which is the remaining biomass after respiration. So the relationship between gross productivity and net productivity is net productivity plus the loss of biomass through respiration gives the gross. Uh, so the net productivity is actually the available biomass for consumption to the consumer level. That means the heterotrophs. So secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by the consumers. Now, decomposition is a very important phenomenon in the ecosystem. It is responsible for converting the complex organic substances into simpler inorganic forms, and also it allows those ingredients to be mixed with the soil or help in them recycling them through various biogeochemical cycles. So breakdown of complex organic matter into inorganic substances like water, carbon dioxide, and other nutrients is called decomposition, which is accomplished by various saprophytic organisms, mainly microbes and fungi. Now, the dead plant remains like leaves, barks, flowers, and dead remains of animals, they are called detritus substance. And so decomposition involves the following steps. First is the breakdown process, fragmentation, then followed by some changes in it, that is leaching. Then catabolism means further metabolic breakdown, then forming the humus from the organic substances, and then mixing with the minerals, that is called mineralization. So we will just quickly glance through the different steps. So fragmentation of the detritus means the detrivores feed upon the detritus matter. They break down and increase the surface area of the detritus particle, which are for the place of action of the microbes. So the microbes break up the detritus substances into simpler forms. Now, leaching is the process in which soluble inorganic nutrients dissolve in water, gradually percolate through the soil particles, and so they are removed from the soil surface due to leaching action. Now, catabolism refers to the breakdown processes by the decomposers, bacteria, fungi, through enzymes, where the detritus materials are converted into simpler inorganic substances. Humification is the process where the simplified detritus are converted into the humus, which is a dark amorphous substance rich in organic matter, and they are highly resistant to microbial action, and so they undergoes decomposition very slowly. It is a good reservoir of all organic substances. And the last step is mineralization. When the humus is degraded, it releases inorganic substances, that is carbon dioxide, water, etc., and nutrients like various elements, ions, calcium, magnesium, potassium, which mix up with the soil and increase the mineral content of the soil. So factors which affect decomposition are chemical factors, chemical composition. Decomposition rate will be slow when the detritus is rich in lignin and chitin, and because they are not easily accessible, broken down by enzymes, and the rate increases when detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble substances like sugar, which are easily broken down by enzymatic actions. Climatic conditions are warm and moist environment favor decomposition than low temperature, and anaerobiosis inhibits decomposition. So the main function of the ecosystem, another main function is energy flow. And we know that the producers occupy the base level in the energy pyramid of an ecosystem. And then the successive levels of consumers are there. Primary consumers, which are mostly the herbivores, which feed upon the producers. Secondary consumers, which feed upon the primary consumers. And finally, the tertiary consumers, which feed upon mostly the secondary consumers. So when we see the how the energy flows through this pyramid, we notice some features. We all know that the main source of energy in an ecosystem is the sunlight. So it is the sun. It is the main source of energy, which is trapped by the green plants, that is the producers, which are the autotrophs. Then the total amount of energy which is utilized, trapped by the producers, only 10% of that energy passes into the next level, and so on. So every time only 10% of the energy is passed into the next level. So accordingly, there is seems to be 90% energy loss, but actually that most of the energy, other than the 10%, it is utilized by the producers there Similarly, the 90% energy is partly it is utilized by the primary consumers. So most of the time the energy is not actually lost, it gets transformed into another form. So the characteristics of energy flow in an ecosystem follows several it has several characteristic features. Now all living organisms depend for their food on producers either directly or indirectly. So energy flow in an ecosystem is always in an unidirectional way. So this always flow in one direction, and that energy will never come back. Same energy will never go back to the sun, or again it will come down to the producers. Now the active radiation, photosynthetically active radiation, is responsible for synthesis of food by the plants, and animals obtain their food from the plants, and the process of this eating and being eaten is basis of the food chain through which the energy flow in a linear direct form in an ecosystem. So the energy flow, number one, is it is unidirectional. It follows 10% law. And third, no energy is created nor destroyed, but energy is always transformed from one form to other. Now here we can have an idea of different food chains. This is a grazing food chain which is starts with this. So here the cabbage leaves, these are the producers, which is eaten by the caterpillar. So it is the primary consumer, which is eaten by a bird. It is the secondary consumer. In a detritus food chain which starts from dead organic matter, it is the dead organic matter which is eaten by the primary detritus feeder, and then it is again fed by secondary detritus feeder. So grazing food chain starts with the living green plants, that is the producers occupying the first trophic level, but detritus food chain starts from a dead organic matter as the first trophic level. So in detritus food chain, a much larger fraction of energy flows. This is important difference. Whereas in grazing food chain, the energy flow is gradually decreasing. So based on the source of the food, the organisms occupying a specific place in the food chain, like a steps of the stair, is called the trophic level. So if there are more number of trophic levels in the ecological pyramid, for example, so this is producer, then this is first consumer, primary consumer, then secondary consumer, then tertiary consumer, then quaternary consumer, and so on. So the energy flow is always only 10%. So there is, as more trophic levels will decrease the flow of energy much more. Now, ecological pyramid is the graphical representation of the ecological parameters, which may be expressed in terms of number, where ecological pyramid of number denotes the number of organisms in each trophic level. Either it will may be an ecological pyramid of biomass, which gives us an idea of the total biomass of each trophic level. And finally, it is the pyramid of energy, which depicts the flow of energy as we have already discussed in our previous slides. So always producers occupy the base, and the uh, carnivores, the primary, secondary, tertiary consumers are all herbivorous and carnivorous in the top tiers. Ecological pyramid is mostly upright, but it may be inverted and spindle shaped also. It must be noted that the pyramid of biomass is upright except in aquatic food chain, which involves short-lived plankton. Um, it is mostly in sea, it is generally inverted because biomass of fishes generally exceeds that of the phytoplankton. So it starts with phytoplankton, then there is fish, whose biomass is much more. So it is not a normal pyramid, it is an inverted pyramid. Pyramid of energy is always upright. It is not inverted because when energy flows from a trophic level to the next one, there is always loss of energy. So these are the three examples of the pyramids: pyramid of energy, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of number. Now we are coming to ecological succession. Now, the gradual and predictable changes in species composition in a given area is called ecological succession. During succession, some species colonize an area and their population become more numerous, whereas some population of other species may decline and even get disappeared. Normally, there is a sequential change that leads to form a community which is at near equilibrium, and it is called the climax community. The entire sequence of the changes in the communities that successively change in a given area is called sear, and individual transitional communities are termed as seral stage or seral communities. Now, in the bare rock, when first organisms appear, they are mostly lichens. From the lichens, then gradually some small annual plants they gradually develop. Finally, in course of time, there are grasslands and perennials, and grasses, then shrubs. It continues to grow, and finally, the shade-tolerant trees such as oak, hickory, large trees come into being. So this is called primary succession. Primary succession is the process which starts totally in a new place where previously no other living organisms existed. So it has to develop, adapt completely to an unknown condition. It starts in the lifeless areas such as the bare rock, which is devoid of soil. Uh, if the primary succession is sometimes the primary succession is destroyed due to various environmental factors, and then the secondary succession takes place. So the secondary succession is the process which occurs when the primary succession ecosystem was destroyed. That means they are developing secondarily in an area which was previously inhabited by some living organisms. For example, a climax community, when it gets destroyed by fire or flood, then it is gets recolonized after destruction. So this recolonization is secondary succession. In this case, small plants emerge first, followed by the larger one, and finally they come to the climax community. So climax community is the point where maximum amount of living organisms thrive in that ecosystem. Very good. Several examples of ecological succession is one is Acadia National Park. Uh, this park suffered a huge wildfire, so restoration of the forest was left to nature. Initially, only small plants grew on the burnt soil. After several years, forest showed diversity in various tree types. However, the trees before the fire were mostly evergreen. But after the fire, when the trees started growing, they were mostly deciduous in nature. Now, on the basis of nature of the habitat, succession of the plants can be grouped into: one is hydrart, which takes place in water area, and succession series progress from hydric to mesic conditions, plant condition. Mesic means terrestrial. And xerarch succession takes place in dry areas, and the series progress from the xeric to the mesic condition. The species which invade a bare area are called pioneer species. So lichen are a very good pioneer species because they can grow in a bare rock area, which secretes, because they can secrete acids which dissolve the rocks to undergo weathering to form soil, and they also get anchorage there. Primary succession in water, the primary species are the small phytoplanktons, which are then replaced by the free floating angiosperms. Now, as we understand, there are continuously energy flow, food chain is going on. So the nutrients continuously move from the living components to the non-living in a cyclic manner. And this is called biogeochemical cycle. There are two types of cycles: gaseous, which exist in atmosphere, and sedimentary, that exists in earth crust. Now, environmental factors like soil, moisture, pH, temperature, they regulate the rate of release of the nutrients into the atmosphere. Now, first cycle, which is very important for our life, is carbon cycle, because carbon is the main constituent of the living cell. Now, carbon is present in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide mostly and methane, and carbon is exchanged continuously between the environment and the living organisms by the two basic processes: respiration and photosynthesis. During photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is taken in by the green plants and fixed in the atmospheric, uh, in the body by the plants. So CO2 is actually fixed in the cell by the plants. By the process of respiration, carbon dioxide is released from the cell into the atmosphere by the living organisms. Besides burning of the fossil fuels, carbon is also released in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. When the dead decomposed decaying matters are undergo decomposition, organic carbon is released into the atmosphere. So there is always mainly a balance. Respiration is the mostly the processes which decomposition, respiration, they release CO2 to the atmosphere, and photosynthesis is the only process which can utilize carbon dioxide. Then comes nitrogen cycle. Now, nitrogen is essential component of life. It's a component of protein molecules. But nitrogen, being very inert in nature, it cannot be taken directly by the living organisms. So nitrogen has to be converted into other forms in different ways, and that process is called nitrogen fixation. Now, nitrogen fixation is done by nitrogen fixing bacteria, which can convert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium ion, and then further the nitrifying bacteria, which convert ammonia into nitrate. There is atmospheric nitrogen fixation, which can be fixed directly by the lightning process. Uh, Decomposers break down proteins and amino acids of the dead organisms and release ammonia. And this ammonia is further converted into nitrates, nitrites and nitrates by nitrifying bacteria, and finally again into nitrogen, which is released by the atmosphere, is called denitrifying bacteria. So the nitrogen cycle is actually, therefore it is, it consists of, we can say it is this nitrogen of atmosphere First, it is fixed as nitrogen compound, ammonium, in the soil. Then this is utilized by the plants. And this fixation may be either biological, by the bacteria, rhizobium, etc., or physicochemical, but is by atmospheric due to lightning. So nitrogen compounds are mostly the ammonium ion. Now plants, they utilize this nitrogen, then they synthesize proteins, they are produced in the plant body, and these proteins are then utilized by the animals as food. So the fixed nitrogen is passing from plants to animals, and this process is actually called nitrogen assimilation. So first step is nitrogen fixation, second one is nitrogen assimilation. Then these animals and plants, they die, they produce excreta which are released in the soil, and they are converted into ammonia. This process is called ammonification. It is the third step by ammonifying bacteria. This ammonia is then converted into first into nitrite ion and then to nitrate ion. By this whole process is the fourth step called nitrification, which is done by the nitrifying bacteria. There are two types of nitrifying bacteria, Nitrobacter and Nitrosomonas. Then this nitrate and nitrite is finally converted, they go back to soil and replenish the soil nitrates. So this cycle goes on, but part of these nitrites, they are converted into atmospheric nitrogen by the step called denitrification. That is also by denitrifying bacteria. So this maintains the nitrogen cycle. Now, oxygen cycle, oxygen is essential element. Oxygen cycle is actually complementary with the carbon dioxide cycle, because again respiration and photosynthesis are the two main process which maintains balance. Photosynthesis releases oxygen, whereas respiration consumes oxygen, and also various other combustion process which consumes oxygen from the atmosphere, that is also responsible for maintaining taking part in the oxygen cycle. So these are the gaseous cycle. Now we will do a, uh, cycle which is related with the soil, sedimentary cycle. Phosphorus is normally stored under in the soil in the form of phosphates. So on weathering, minute amount of phosphates dissolve in the soil solution, which are easily absorbed by the roots of the plants. The waste products of the dead organisms are then decomposed by the bacteria. They release phosphate. So we can see the phosphate is coming mainly from the rock materials by weathering. That enters into the soil solution, and that from the soil solution it is taken by the producers. This producer then supply the phosphate to the consumers, which are then again after death they are decomposed by to form the detritus matter, and this detritus due to mineralization they mixed up with the soil solution and come again and form this they replenish the phosphate of the soil. So this forms this, these are the phases of the phosphorus cycle. Gaseous exchange is very negligible. Water cycle is very common. We know water from the water bodies. Basically, the two processes responsible for the water cycle is one is evaporation, from which the water is converted into water vapor by the process of evaporation, and the plants by transpiration. So these are the two processes by which water is converted into vapor. This water vapor is then condensed and returned to the atmosphere by precipitation. So the next process is condensation. Evaporation is one, this comes under one process. and then it is condensation, and then precipitation, and the cycle continues. So nutrient cycle is very significant. It is required for the conversion of nutrients from one form to another so that they can be used by various organisms in various forms. Secondly, it is important to maintain the balance of the nutrients in the ecosystem to make it sustainable. And this maintains the interaction of the living organisms between themselves and with the abiotic components as well. So the main advantages of the ecosystem is the healthy forest ecosystem purify water, air and water by supplying much oxygen and taking more CO2 by photosynthesis. Uh, they prevent soil erosion and therefore mitigates flood and droughts. They are responsible for cycling nutrients. They generally produce fertile soil. The wildlife habitat is important and maintain biodiversity.